All right. So welcome to the NotAWebinar webinar. I apologize for the little technical glitch there. I want to get a better way to mix in the audio so that it's more of a movie. I don't know, more entertaining. But it was a little bit shaky. But thanks for bearing with me. And we're just going to jump into it here. I've got about 3 windows open on my screen trying to manage everything. So I'll try to look at the camera as much as I can. I noticed that I put on the wrong kind of shirt for broadcasting today, so I apologize. I think most people are muted here, and that's good. I was going to try to figure out how to mute everybody, but looks like everybody's good. So I'm just going to go right into the formal part of the presentation, and like I said, we're going to have a lot of time to talk about any questions that you might have. So it's not really a webinar. We're just basically sharing some information. So some housekeeping first, just so you kind of know what our company is about. Dynamark Media is the authorized Crestron service provider, and it's the owner of SharptoothCode. SharptoothCode is something that we launched in 2018 to provide custom programming capabilities that could kind of transcend, I guess you could say, the local market. We work with a lot of local dealers, and we do some remote work, and we wanted a way to basically leverage advanced programming capabilities with simple Sharp based on C# programming for people that have their own programming teams. So that's where SharptoothCode came from. I had a friend of mine draw up this nice little shark logo you see in the corner, and the idea behind Sharptooth was kind of a play on words with C#. So that was clever, I guess. I don't know. It was fun anyways. Just so you know, the session will be recorded and distributed to people that have registered for it. And if you're here, that means you too. So I put that in there if you have to go for some reason, if something comes up. I know how it is. Sometimes things get crazy when you're a programmer. So if you've got to go, you'll get the recording provided that everything records properly, and it should. And just so you know, the recording might be used for future promotional content. So if you're on video, and nobody is, so it's not a big deal. It's kind of part of the recording somewhere, somehow. I'll have to see what it looks like anyways. So I was going to mute everybody for the first part of the presentation, but looks like everybody's already muted, so that's good. When we get to the question and answer stuff, we can kind of talk between each other if we need to or if we want to, or we can just keep it short and to the point. So an overview of where we're going here with this presentation. We're going to talk about who we are, a little bit about who you are, just to see who's on the call with us. The problem that we've identified with creating a matrix module, and that's the main module we're going to talk about today, is our matrix switcher module. And we'll explain the solution, and then Troy is going to do some live demonstration showing kind of how it's put together. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers and a special promotional offer. A little bit more about SharptoothCode. I kind of talked about it before. We kind of have this concept of Lego blocks, where you can take building blocks of pre-tested code that do specific functions and use them in your programs to leverage additional capabilities and advanced capabilities. So we've seen a lot of people in the market create modules for devices. We're kind of focusing more on modules that do complicated stuff. So far we've got the matrix module, which you'll see today. We're also developing an audio controller module that can control audio levels and also lighting levels in sort of a behind-the-scenes synchronized way. So very modular and easy to put our module into your program. You know the control points to hook up to your logic, and then you can kind of customize your program around that. So we know that it takes years to become proficient as a programmer, and if you've never worked with object-oriented programming like simple Sharp, you've got your work cut out for you to become proficient. So what we wanted to do was help leverage the vast experience that Troy has with C# as it applies to simple Sharp, and create some really cool stuff that you can use without having to kind of do the deep dive and go in the hole for months and years to really figure out how to make this stuff and make it work so it doesn't crash everything. Our team, which is basically Troy and myself, create modules with solid and flexible back-end code. So we put stuff that we would use in our own programs. We know to think kind of ahead and have different parameters and different configurable options that let you do more than just one thing. Because we know that if you're going to put in a matrix switcher, you're going to maybe put in 2 matrix switchers. If you're going to have 1 input, you might have 5 inputs. We want to be somewhat flexible in that so that you're not locked down within reason to fixed parameters. And as I said before, you can plug the modules that we're going to build right into your code and customize your program to do what you need. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention here at this point is the way that we approach this is something that might be useful to you even if you don't buy our modules. You can see how we kind of think about making building blocks, and you can use that for your own frameworks too, where you want to create things that are reusable but kind of limited in scope to a certain function, and then you can plug them in different spots. One of the things that we like doing is the synchronization behind the scenes with simple Sharp, so that we don't have to tie in hundreds of different signals between things, because that's one area where it really becomes complicated, dropping these modules into programs. And you can have tons of bugs just because you might not have make string permanent, you might not have the right signal indexing, you might miss a signal or miss a few or rename them. So a lot of the guts of the data going between the different modules happens behind the scenes. Now, if you've ever worked with BiAmp, the new BiAmp modules do something similar. We've developed, or Troy has developed, a method of doing that that's actually more robust than it seems that they're doing. So we've got that capability. And we'll license these modules typically per processor with volume discounts for people that are using them a lot. And then on SharptoothCode, we also have some free and cheap stuff, inexpensive stuff. Some for like simpler tasks, and other stuff we throw on there, just you can take a look at the code and learn a bit. There's this bargain bin that I decided to put on there where there's kind of half implemented versions of simple Sharp code that you can look at and see kind of a little bit of what we have done. One of them is mine. It's not very good because I'm not very good at simple Sharp. Troy is kind of the brains behind there. So about me, Crestron certified programmer. I've got close to 20 years experience in the AV industry, working for all sorts of integrators. I started Dynamark Media about 4 years ago, kind of going out on my own, and Troy came on board probably 2 years ago, 2.5. I'd have to check the dates, but it's been a while, and I'll talk about him in a minute. I'm passionate about creating resources to help make things easier and work better, because I've struggled through so many problems trying to program Crestron. And AMX I also have worked with. And through all my experience, I mentor and train Crestron programmers through some YouTube videos you might have seen as proavschool.com. That's something that I started quite a few years ago, and I haven't been very active with it lately, but I still do some training videos, and I still train some people individually so I can help people through that mechanism. Troy Garner is a Crestron certified programmer with the asterisk there, and that is once they mark his exam. It's been about 100 days since he submitted them. Crestron gets kind of backlogged with that stuff, so I'm sure some of you guys can relate to that. He's the lead developer and the brains behind most of the complicated stuff that we're doing at SharptoothCode. He is a Microsoft MVP and a C# whiz, so he knows his stuff with C#. I haven't seen anybody else that has quite the breadth of knowledge in how the backend stuff works as he does, including Crestron guys too. And he's dedicated to helping other .NET developers, and he shares a lot with other developers in Crestron forums. So there isn't really too many people on here right now, just Richard. So I don't know if you want to chime in at all, or if you just want to chat, like put in the chat window how many years you've been programming. I was going to kind of go round table and ask worst programming experience. I'll just share mine. I was at a remote site about 10 p.m. on the top of a mountain, actually, some coal mine, moving signals around in a touch panel, just trying to get done. And I made the mistake of copying some stuff over some other stuff and passed the undo limitation of simple windows. It was a lot of fun. But I'm sure you're getting bored with kind of the introduction. I just wanted to spend a bit of time so you know kind of what we're about and where we're coming from, rather than just being solely technical. Now, the problem with matrix switching is the inputs and outputs are usually hard-coded. So if you ever need to change things, and I found that to happen quite a bit. Maybe I just work with people that change things a lot, but I think it happens quite regularly where you need to change, for certain reasons or whatever, you need to change how inputs and outputs are structured. It can take time to do that if you've got them all defined with analogs and moving that stuff around. And it can create a lot of bugs, especially for beginner programmers that tie a lot of things to certain press events. So once you have to cascade switching, it gets even more complicated and obviously more error prone and tons of bugs. So cascade switching isn't something that you would have seen in the past, but now with DM, a lot of transmitters actually have multiple inputs. So you'll have customers that ask you to put, say, a VGA and an HDMI selection at the table, or two HDMI selections through the 201 or whatever the HDMI version is, 202 transmitter. And so all of a sudden you've got this scenario of cascaded switches, and depending on what you're routing it to, you might want to manage that better than just kind of luck of the draw. It's difficult to have true feedback of what the routing is. So we've developed a modular solution. It's kind of a play on words. And it's virtual indexing so that physical inputs and outputs can be easily changed. Central controller module with internally synchronized device controller modules. Expandable and can be cascaded. Input and output naming flows through internally, so selected source is always accurate. Changes propagate back from the hardware, keeping everything in sync. Configuration from a file that is easily reloaded without having to recompile anything. And that's pretty powerful because that means you can send somebody to site to make changes without having to mess with the core code. Even if you're the programmer that's built it, I personally hate messing with my code if I don't have to, because I know it's solid and I don't really want to change it and recompile it. Because if you have a new database version or whatever, there's always the chance that something you do causes problems when you load it, and then you have a whole bunch of stuff you got to debug and figure out what's going on. This is the point where we wanted to do a demonstration live with Troy and kind of walk through the different parts of the module. So Troy, are you live there? So it looks like we've pretty much lost our live attendees, which is okay. We're still going to keep going because it's something that we'll share with the people that registered. Because I understand people are busy, so we'll keep going through it and make sure that people that registered get the information that they needed. It kind of changes the dynamic because we can't really ask any questions or get any feedback, but we'll just keep going. So take it away, Troy. You should be able to start sharing now. I don't see it yet.
Desktop here. And the window should be up.
Yep.
So just to go through some of the hierarchy of the modules here. you can see it creates a very nice organized folder structure where you've got your matrix controller. I put my matrix device so that all in the same subsystem. So I've got my DM8x8 and the cascaded 4x1 switchers, which both tie into an input on the 8x8 switcher. This module is licensed, so you can see on the controller that now there's, instead of a parameter, it's a serial input for the license key. So that way you can have multiple programs which feed a license key from a configuration file, so you don't need to recompile for every room if you're using this module in a multiple room system. And then I've got my configuration there. I've got, in the case of the 8x8, video and audio components are separated. So that's one of the other more recent features that I've added to this module, where you can choose the subclass identifier. And I've given some of the most basic options that you would need there. So onto my demo, which I've loaded to my MC3 already. For audio selections, you'll need to pick a root type and a source, because it just routes to the speakers. But in the case of audio and video or video selections, you'd have to choose a source and destination. And this is all based on real feedback. So if this system was connected to an 8x8 switcher, which in this case it's not, this feedback would come from the switcher for whether you could deroute that source or not. And in the case of the workstations, these are inputs off the 4x1 switcher. So you can only have one output off that switcher feeding the 8x8. So if I was to switch one to the other, you could see that it switches to the other monitor as well, because they come off the same switcher. And a general overview of what that configuration file looks like that is being used for this program. I've got matrix definitions, and there's an array of those. So I have my 8x8 and both 4x1 switchers in there. And for each of the matrix definitions, there's always an identifier. This is a required thing, and it must match the parameter for the symbol on the matrix devices. But you've got virtual inputs, virtual outputs, the names, whether or not this is a dynamic name or not, so you can feed or allow the flow of the input text for whatever is routed to that input to go to the output. In this case, this was from the 4x1 switcher. And then because this file can be pretty big, one of the recent things I did, and this has undergone multiple revisions, is I switched over to JSON. And XML is also supported, but one of the things you can do that's kind of unique to this module is you can use the schema that I've packaged with the demo program on the SharptoothCode.com website. And you can use the schema to validate whether you're not only the JSON syntax is correct, but whether the values that you're using are valid within the confines of the actual module itself. So in this case, I only support input indexes 1 through 128. So if I was to put anything higher than that, you can see the schema recognizes that that's an invalid value, and you can fix this beforehand without loading it to your program and then figuring out from the client several months down the road that it's not working properly. So syntax is only half the battle, but now that I have the schema, you can validate your types as well as the inputs, and in the case of numeric values, whether the range is even valid for what the module does. And then you would basically load it to your file system wherever you have the program pointed at. So I'll go in here and I'll quickly edit some values so you can see how fast this propagates through. I'll change these all to W1, 2, and 3. Make sure it uploads through FileZilla, and then read the config, and you can see it all changes. It deroutes every switcher back to 0 just so you have a clean slate to start with. So whenever you read the config, it will clear all the sources. But you can see if I was to choose this, it shows the proper naming for whatever is routed to those destinations based on the current config. And window mode, that was for a DV-PHD. So this is also based on real feedback. If the DV-PHD is routed to the right monitor, it'll show the 4 quadrants, because you can choose on the input of the DV-PHD what quadrant you want to route the video to. And this also ties into the snapshots. So if I was to clear this and clear that, I can recall this. And it puts it back in that configuration where the DV-PHD is routed to the right monitor. Whatever input that I chose for quadrant 1, I think, is also routed to the DV-PHD, and the left monitor routing is also there. So you can clear these. These are saved in memory until you save them to disk. So just to show my MVRAM folder, it's clean right now, but if I was to save this to disk and refresh this directory, oh, that was saving to this slot. So if I saved a disk there, then it creates a cache folder for every one of my matrix devices. So this is the video and audio cache. The video cache and audio cache for the 8x8 separately. And it's pretty compact, but these are something that you wouldn't normally edit manually. And then the reason for that is now you can take these, transfer to your other systems that you need, and you can load the same user configured runtime snapshots from disk without having to go and save them all manually to every single system.
So for example, if you had a some sort of a control room with like a ton of monitors and a ton of sources, you could let the users do whatever they want, route anything anywhere, and then save a snapshot of what they like. And then you can recall that from a single button press, or you have the file that you could distribute to another control room or something like that very easily.
Yep. And that also, presets are a part of the configuration file here, but the problem with the presets is that they're hard-coded. So in the case where you want a user to set up a preset, which in this case I've called snapshot, you can get them to set it up however they like, tell them to save it, and then you can transport this configuration of their runtime snapshots globally across multiple systems.
And using the Lego block kind of analogy of just plugging this into your program, as a programmer, you can choose how you want to store that and when you want to trigger it. You could have it, maybe a time of day would save the user presets to disk. Maybe this time of day would push the user preset back to a certain configuration or something. You've got a lot of flexibility in how this thing actually operates. What Troy's showing us the demo is just kind of the way he implemented it to be able to show a bunch of features. So
yep.
It's pretty powerful.
And then so 2 other points that I'd like to mention about this configuration file. This part might be a little confusing, but this relates to the control output routing. So in this case, I've decided to use crosspoints. So you can set up your crosspoints IDs here, and these will be based on and connected to based on the input and output routing for the outputs. So the virtual to physical remapping, you can choose where your control gets fed in terms of like a DM receiver that you might be controlling a display off of. So if you move that DM receiver from output 1 to output 2, for instance, you can't necessarily control it off the same DM output. But in order to keep your programming the same, you can allow crosspoints to make those ties for you to where you feed the serial signals to go to an RS-232 port to control a device. And then down here, the snapshot's default name. When I saved this one, for instance, you'll notice there's a timestamp in there. So that is parsed based on the current time of the processor in this format. So hours, minutes, seconds, double digits for month and day, and a 4-digit year. And that's parsed exactly at the time that you save this snapshot. So it's kind of a dynamic variable that you can insert into a fixed portion of the snapshot name. So if I was to save this, you can see it's 10:30, and the last one was saved at 10:26. You do have the ability to change these at runtime as well, but just for the default name, you can also choose a default for when a snapshot gets saved. This name is what will show up in that snapshot slot. And then you can, of course, specify the snapshot cache file location and name and a bunch of other things.
This module has been tested quite thoroughly. So if you're experimenting with it, there's the free download that you can get from our website. Basically, if you have any problems or any questions with how it should be implemented, we'd be happy to assist. There's a support link on the website that you could start a ticket with us, and if we need to explain it more in depth, we could set up a session kind of live like this on Zoom to kind of go through it and make sure that you understand what you need to do. I think this module has a lot of power, possibly to the point where it's a little bit confusing when you just see it, but it can do so much of what you need done on a large majority of projects that have matrix switchers that it's definitely worth a look.
And so with that, I can show just a little bit of how extensive this module development was. I'm fortunate enough to know a bit about C# where I can implement all this crazy functionality into these modules. But this one was definitely one of the most time-consuming ones. You can see just how much code was involved in this module when I compiled it. And this is the current version of the module, so it's quite a bit of source code to go through here, but there's my symbols folder, my module synchronization framework that's kind of a dynamic approach to the publisher and subscriber method. But it ended up being a much larger project than I initially intended, and I'm quite happy with the result.
All right, so this is the point where we're going to go to the Q&A, but we don't have anybody on live anymore. So it'll be a little bit less useful on the recording. So I already chimed in with a little bit of stuff when Troy was explaining it. Nobody has really emailed in any questions, and we did have a chat in the session, but nobody has posted any questions. So we'll just skip right past that. And one of the other things we wanted to offer as an incentive for having joined this webinar and registered for it, we really appreciate that. We want to get this this module into your hands. We're regularly selling it for $99 for a single license. And we've got a code here, NotAWebinar. Just use that when you check out at SharptoothCode.com on the actual license version of the module. And you'll get a 50% discount until January 18th, which is Friday. So with that, and with not really anybody on live anymore, we're going to end it. And thanks for taking the time to watch. And feel free to ask us any questions through support on our website or engaging with us through, trying to think what other channels we have. It's probably just support on the website for now. All right, awesome. Thanks a lot. And this recording will be available, but if you're watching the recording, you already know that. So thanks, Troy, for your time. And
thank you.
We'll do another one of these soon. Thanks.